Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are following breaking news where a federal investigative agency has basically released its investigative report on what happened with BioLab in Conyers, which caught fire back in September, I should say, of 2024. And that report really putting a lot of blame on BioLab with how their chemicals were stored, saying that the chemicals themselves were more than had been disclosed to local officials. And that this was, quote, preventable. I have Caitlin Ross with me here in studio. We were just talking behind the scenes of like our recollection of covering this fire as it happened. I mean, that call came in and they said, you know, a chemical plant caught on fire. It's one of those things in the newsroom where you're like, okay, maybe send someone out. We quickly realized how big of a deal this was.
Right, because you could see it from our studios
here
in Midtown.
Yeah.
And that's 50 miles away, and you could see that toxic plume that went up. And I remember I just started getting messages of people who lived in the area, and they're sending me these pictures that almost looked otherworldly.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable to see the images that were
yeah.
coming out of there. And they weren't given a lot of guidance at first. People were really trying to figure out, what does this mean? What should we do? Do we shelter in place? Do we evacuate? And first responders were really scrambling. That was one of the scariest parts of this to me, was there were first responders screaming in from all over Metro Atlanta. And I think you did some reporting that they at first didn't have the PPE they needed to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, we went back and we listened to basically radio chatter, the dispatch chatter between these first responders and their managers, and they're like, what do we do? You know, this doesn't seem like a regular fire. Water, wasn't putting it out. This is not a standard operating procedure for them. And they knew, they could feel it. They could taste it. They could smell it. They're like, this is something, is this safe? I heard them asking again and again. You know, they're worried for themselves, and they don't know how to approach this. And I think, in fact, like some of what would normally be their response for a fire could have been more dangerous. I mean, this all came about because of the sprinkler system and how it interacted.
You know, you make such a good point there, because that report came out and we knew that there was going to be some culpability on behalf of BioLab just in the early reporting from our local agencies that came out. But I just quickly read through that federal report. It is damning. I mean, it is really strident in the language, saying that this could have been prevented. And I think for so many people who live there, those first responders, reading through this report is going to cause a lot of real anger and frustration.
Yeah, and speaking of, some of the reporting we were doing back then, I think a lot of the questions that people had in the immediate aftermath and still today were the neighbors in the direct vicinity. I mean, what was it, like 17,000 people like evacuated, and there's a lot of farmland in this area too. So people are like, how is this impacting my yard, my crops, my animals? I mean, the people with horse farms. So we actually did a story, and I think we have it pulled up so we can watch it, but we did a story where we followed someone who was doing independent testing of a lot of that debris. I mean, it was like chunks of ash.
Stuff that people were finding.
And people were like, do I pick this up? What do I do? And EPA and environmental leaders were holding press conferences saying it's fine. I would pick it up with my bare hands and throw it away. But we wanted to know for sure. So we followed some of that independent testing. Let's go ahead and watch that story. In the days following the chemical fire at BioLab in Conyers, we met environmental advocate Scott Smith. At the request of worried nearby residents, Smith collected various water, soil, and debris samples and tested them at an independent lab.
So you can see that this polystyrene foam and that was ash and soot.
Now the preliminary results are in.
And this is 48 pages.
Samples taken from a recreational pond owned by the VFW within 1,500 feet of BioLab raised the most concern.
We found volatile organic compounds that really shouldn't be in water. A lot of them cause cancer. And dioxins bioaccumulate in your body. They don't go away.
Also within the early results, a soil sample from a residence near the fire.
There was not really detectable levels of these dioxins in the soil sample.
Along with ash from a nearby car windshield.
There were some detectable levels on the windshield, but they seemed, from my understanding, to be kind of comparable to what we would expect for kind of a major city.
11 Alive News Investigates brought the results to Dr. Stephanie Ike with Emory School of Public Health to interpret what they mean for those who live or work near BioLab.
The data that you provided, that really helped answer some of those questions.
Ike confirmed the dioxins found in the water sample are linked to negative health impacts.
So some of the short-term health impacts that we would expect from dioxins is watering eyes or irritants. It could be a skin irritant. Could also be like coughing fits or more frequent like asthma attacks or COPD if you have some of those underlying conditions. In the long term, some of the health impacts could be developing different types of cancers, as well as reproductive impacts and developmental disabilities.
And she says those impacts go beyond the immediate exposure to the chemical plume that lingered in the air for days after the fire.
They're very persistent in the environment, and what I mean by that is that they could last for many years.
Still, she says more testing is needed to determine which dioxins can be linked to the fire and what the public health impacts may be.
We need public health infrastructure who can really be on the ground in real time and to be able to get samples and answer a lot of these questions immediately.
An EPA spokesperson told 11 Alive News Investigates during its early response to the fire, the agency set up dams to stop flow from the VFW pond to Almond Creek and the South River, saying it continually monitored the water quality, which indicated the dams were effective and kept out runoff from the fire. The day after the fire, the EPA and state EPD did find dead minnows in the pond and aerated the water to remove any chlorine or firefighting runoff products, emphasizing confidence that levels are now within state quality standards and no drinking water was impacted. The agency did not provide the actual water monitoring data we requested.
There's hopefully a call for public pressure to really make it so that we can get better data.
Caitlin, we've switched spots here. You're going to take over at 2, but I just wanted to note, I think we knew that the runoff and the issues had kind of passed. They'd retested, and this aired back in 2025. But one of the big unknowns is how this really impacted people who were breathing that in.
Right.
And I think, as we heard from Emory, we won't know the full extent of that for a while. I know there's a class action lawsuit that had, gone underway pretty shortly after the fire for people potentially impacted in the short term. I remember interviewing people who had asthma and obviously they could hardly breathe, when they were evacuating. I think the whole evacuation process in general seemed very chaotic to a lot of people because they didn't know really what they were working with there. So I do think just the health effects in the long term are just still to be known, which is a really scary thing.
It is really scary. They put the numbers of the evacuations and the shelters in place in that report. It was 17,000 people evacuated, 90,000 people told to shelter in place. So still really breathing that in. And to your point, I think it is so scary that something like this happens. You see the immediate explosion, that toxic plume, and the scientist you're interviewing is saying this could be years before you really know the impacts of this.
And after all of that, to see this report and to see words like preventable,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
what a gut punch that.
It really is. I know we're going to be doing a lot of reporting on this. I know you're going to keep digging into it. Thank you so much for your expertise on this. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Thanks, Caitlin.
So we're going to keep following this new BioLab report just coming out from federal investigators basically saying that the explosion that happened in 2024 was preventable. This is a long report. They spent 2 years putting it together, making sure that they went deep into that investigation. What they found was the state of that lab was really bad. They said it was in very bad condition. The sprinklers were corroding. You could see the sprinklers that were corroding. The water got into pool chemicals, and that's what caused that explosion. So we are going to continue to follow this. I know there's going to be a lot more reporting coming out about this. If you live in Conyers, if you were part of that evacuation area, that shelter in place, please get in touch with us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear how this impacted your life, and I know this is going to be something that we continue to cover.